Hey guys, welcome back. Hope you guys are doing well. Hope your day is going well and having a wonderful day. My day has been kind of busy. I had a very long morning, woke up at 8, couldn't sleep. Usually I can't sleep after I've woken up. It's a weird thing. Anyway, spent my morning doing homework, playing Animal Crossing, all of that fun stuff. Had a meeting, then I had my acting class, and I shoved lunch into my stomach when I could. So here we are. I also downloaded two new games. Ooh. So adding to the schedule starting next week, I will be playing Valorant every single Monday, and playing through the Dead Space remake every single Friday. So we'll have one designated day for this horror book reading from now on until we're done with Dead Space. Then we'll see what happens after that. But that's the ongoing plan for now. So yeah, I've never played Valorant before. I'm looking forward to it. Shooters have been slowly growing on me, so we'll see how that goes. Yeah, so there's not too much to say besides we're hopping back into Stolen Tongues today, and wherever you're watching this, if you are new here, we are on chapter 19. So if you have not watched previous VODs, been in previous streams, know what's going on, I recommend going to my YouTube channel, clicking on the playlist that says horror books and or horror stories, whichever one, and watching through Stolen Tongues up until you're caught up. Otherwise, you'll be pretty confused, but you're still welcome here. If you don't want to do that, of course, you're more than welcome. As always, I will be reading page by page, so in between each page, I will be reading any chats that I see going through so that I don't break the immersion as much as I would when reading a chat whenever it comes through. So we're just gonna hop right into it. I'm gonna switch on over to my scary stories scene here and then switch my music, which that should be good. So we're gonna jump right into it. Chapter 19. I think that's where she lets him in. Angela's words ran through my head on repeat the entire night. The rational and superstitious part of me offered dueling explanations for our predicament. Some backwoods creep stalking my partner after spotting her at the cabin, or demonic entity of some distant dimension preying on her soul. I even imagined the creatures from Faye's drawings manifesting themselves in reality by the power of her own dreams. It was madness, and it pulled me ever downward to a place where I couldn't trust my own reason anymore. By the time the sun rose, I had already emailed my boss, booked a flight back to Colorado, and left a voicemail on Lynn's phone. I knew there was something going on at the cabin that she and Greg didn't want me to find, but neither of them seemed the type to try and stop me. I told her that I'd already spoken to the ranger and his friends, and that I was beyond any capacity to tolerate one more lie. I ended the voicemail with, "This is an emergency. I'm doing this for your daughter, and I need your help." I also texted my closest friends, Colin and Tyler, and asked if they'd be willing to check in on Faye while I was gone. By 11 a.m., I heard back from both of them, each offering to put her up in his home while I was away. I knew Faye would never return to Colin's house after the creepy incident with the bird all those years ago, but Tyler lived nearby, and his girlfriend got along with Faye pretty well. Faye's reaction to all of this was nothing short of breathtaking. She simply nodded in agreement and thanked me for doing what I thought was best for her. I expected a verbal mauling for making such a serious decision without consulting her, but her expression made it clear that she was even more fed up with this chaos than I was. I understood why. I slept peacefully that night. Tyler and Colin had been in my life since we were kids, and they treated Faye like family. They'd guard her with their lives. I privately informed them most of the things she'd been through, and why I was heading back to Colorado. But I spun it all in such a way that made our house seem haunted. Colin had always been a stone-cold atheist and didn't buy a word of what I said, but Tyler believed in all sorts of hocus-pocus, thanks to his fervently religious mother and conspiracy theorist father. Together, I hoped they would make a well-rounded team. Maybe they would see something I hadn't. Maybe they'd figure something out that I couldn't. The idea of Faye getting out of the house and being around other people gave me a glimmer of hope. The morning was frantic. I parried a dozen of Lynn's attempts to dissuade me over the phone, threw some clothes in the suitcase, dropped Faye off at Tyler's apartment, rushed to the airport, and just barely caught the noon flight out to Denver. There was nobody around to hold my hand during takeoff this time, and that dreadful cabin loomed at the forefront of my thoughts. I loathed every moment of the journey. One thing did bolster my resolve. Tue and I spoke briefly as I waited for the plane. He called just to check in, and was delighted to hear that I was on my way out to meet him. In the dizzying world of plans and plots, I'd forgotten entirely to warn him of my coming. On the plane, I wondered what else might have slipped my scattered mind. Find the ring. Get the ring. The reminder became a mantra to keep me focused, and if I ever pondered too deeply on what-ifs, I simply conjured the image of Faye, laughing and smiling. I tried to imagine her as she was before all this misery. I longed to see that Faye again, the wild-eyed lioness with the mane of fire. If I could get the ring back, maybe I could get my fiancé back too. I do have the windows open because it is a very, very nice day outside. Lovely spring day, the snow is melting, it's very nice outside. So if you hear any cars, any sirens, because I'm in a city right now, anything like that, just try to ignore it. I arrived in Avonwood after dark. My cheap rental car stood out in the fleet of Mercedes and BMWs that sat in every driveway. Lynn answered the door with her trademark plastic but well-meaning smile. Greg was presumably so furious at my intrusion that he remained sequestered upstairs for the whole evening. Faye's mother and I sat at the enormous glass dining room table, sipping hot chocolate and working our way through the miserable pleasantries of in-law conversation. It didn't take much for her to get her to hand over the cabin key. She burst into tears the moment I asked her, "Would you like to hear what your daughter has been through?" "I'm so sorry I lied to you," she mumbled between sobs. "To both of you." I was thrown off guard by the abruptness of her honesty. I also recognized it as a rare moment that could vanish as quickly as it had appeared. "Don't worry, Lynn," I said, trying to sound reassuring. "It's okay. Faye loves you, and I'm sure she forgives you. But you can make it up to us right now by telling me what the hell is going on. What have you been lying about? I can't help her if you don't tell me everything." Lynn looked up at me with an expression I'd never seen her wear before. It seemed devoid of any performance. What hung there on her face was a look of terror and sorrow, unleashed after weeks of denial. She gazed through me with bloodshot eyes and fingered at the tiny gold crucifix that dangled from her neck. "That cabin," she said, taking a deep breath. "Faye's been there before. Only once. It's where her night terrors started. Something happened up there, Felix." "Tell me," I implored. I reached over her and held her freezing hand. It trembled. "She was just a little girl," Lynn whispered, new tears rolling down her face. "She was only 5 years old." "When we first got the place, Greg used to stay there on fishing trips with his buddies," Lynn said, regaining some of her composure. She wiped her face and looked over her shoulder to make sure her husband wasn't around. Mirror Lake's on the other side of the mountain, so they go up there for some competition every spring. One year was especially tough on us emotionally, so we planned a little getaway for a weekend. Greg always loved the outdoors, and he wanted the kids to love it too, and to be honest, I think he always wanted a boy, and he ended up trapped in a house with three ladies. I laughed. The image of Faye cleaning a rifle or wrestling a bear, for that matter, wasn't too hard to imagine. She was as tough as any boy Greg might have had. Faye's sister was around 10 at the time, and she didn't come with us, Lynn continued. There was some kind of retreat with her Girl Scout troop that weekend, so she went with them instead. "Has Becca ever been to the cabin?" I asked. "No. She's never been interested. Not much of a mountain girl. In fact, she lives in Phoenix now." The sound of a toilet flushing came from upstairs, followed by footsteps across the hall. We both listened for a moment. A door closed. "They were outside the cabin," Lynn said, voice barely above a whisper. Greg and Faye, building snowmen in the field next to the driveway. I could see them from the kitchen window. I had the news on, and I remember looking over at the TV for a few minutes. When I looked back, I couldn't see Faye anymore. Greg was still rolling a big ball of snow. Faye had walked over to the edge of the meadow to look into the forest. Gray said he heard her talking, but thought she was just singing to herself. Eventually, he realized that she was answering questions, like there was someone in the woods. Faye was trying to follow a voice. As Greg walked over there, he heard Faye saying things like, "Just Mommy and Daddy," and "She's not here," and "I can't see you. What's your name?" Those phrases struck a nerve in me. They were just like Faye's sleep talk now. Whoever was interrogating her had been doing it on and off for decades. But what was he looking for? The question was like fire on my brain. All of a sudden, she started screaming. Lynn continued. It was like she saw something terrifying. I heard it and came running outside into the snow. I didn't even have shoes on. Greg was already rushing over there, and he caught Faye just as she fell. She went rigid and her eyes rolled back in her head. Just seeing my daughter like that? I've never been so scared in my life. Everything Lynn said resonated with me in a dreadful way. I glanced around the dark living room, sifting through the 100 questions that brimmed at the edge of my lips. "Do you think she fell asleep?" I asked. I've read about soldiers falling asleep in the middle of a battle. It's some kind of defense mechanism the brain uses to protect you from trauma. "No," Lynn replied. "She was definitely awake. We hauled her back inside, and for a few hours she would either cry hysterically or just sit there in silence. She couldn't speak at all. We eventually decided to take her back down the mountain to a hospital, but when we got into town, she got better all of a sudden. Just went right back to normal, like turning on a light. The doctors thought she had some kind of seizure, but couldn't find anything wrong with her." To this day, Greg swears he never heard any other voices or saw anyone in those woods. We only stayed there one more time about a year later, just the two of us for our anniversary, and that's when Greg's night terrors came back. He never slept there again. And Faye? When did she start up with the nightmares and sleepwalking? Lynn picked at her fingernails. A few days after the incident. They've come and gone ever since. A mixture of rage and fright churned up in my gut, pushing the hot chocolate up to the back of my throat. "And you thought sending us back there was a good idea?" I demanded. "I didn't know," Lynn said, a bit too loud. More tears welled up in her eyes. "I honestly didn't think that trauma would resurface after all these years. What do you expect me to believe? That there's some phantom up on Pale Peak that likes to talk to kids?" Lynn abruptly left the table and headed upstairs, apologizing as she went. I couldn't tell if she was more embarrassed by the fact she doomed her daughter in sending her back to the cabin, or simply that she was crying in front of her future son-in-law. I threw my hands into the air and retired to Faye's old bedroom for the night. I'd seen the home videos. Little Faye was adorable and curious. A kid like that would certainly hold a conversation with a stranger, maybe even one from another dimension, if he interested her enough. Whoever it was that called out to her from those woods, it was delighted that she spoke back. Perhaps he became fascinated with her, or something he thought she knew, and had been digging through her mind for years, trying to unearth it. Faye's strong personality might have prevented him from fooling her while she was awake, but while asleep, she is as gentle as a lamb and naive, almost like a child. I believe that if Faye had remembered what had happened to her at the cabin, she'd never have agreed to go back. Not even with me. It made sense then that she had probably repressed the experience or forgotten it entirely. What few physical details about the cabin she remembered were probably repackaged by her brain as dim flashes from an uneventful trip. I was awoken the next morning by a text message left from Tyler. He told me Faye had slept through the night without incident, and that his fiancée Allison had been cheering her up. Colin and Gabriella were planning on making the drive to our town, so Faye would have plenty of company for the weekend. Knowing that our friends were rallying to her side made me smile. As usual, Greg was up early, tinkering in the kitchen and grumbling to himself. As I made my way down there, he stopped what he was doing and watched me approach. For a moment, it almost looked as if he didn't know I'd even come to visit. But then I realized he was simply unable to bring himself to speak to me. Maybe Lynn told him that we talked. Maybe he heard everything from the top of the stairs. "Be careful with her," he said, tossing a ring of keys on the bar counter that separated us. The weather's warming up, but the roads are still icy up there, I'm sure. He rushed past me and headed out to the patio for his morning cigarette. I examined the keys. The truck was Greg's favorite child. It belonged to his father, Alfred, and when he died, Greg had rebuilt the engine and restored the interior. He worked on it every week, rain or shine, always finding new problems to solve. Faye maintained that this was his way of managing the pain of Alfred's death. The ability to fix one thing balanced the inability to fix another. I couldn't help but wonder if Greg's gesture meant that he trusted me. "Look," he said, holding the patio door open with his foot. "I didn't say anything, and I should have." Of course you fucking should have. I wanted to snap at him. If it wasn't for Lynn and Greg's horrible negligence, none of this would have happened. Faye and I would be living normal lives like regular people, and I wouldn't be missing work and pissing off my advisor and colleagues. I wouldn't be heading back up to that godforsaken place all alone. I swallowed the urge to bite back and nodded instead. "We honestly wanted to believe there was nothing wrong with the place," he said. He forced the last words up with considerable effort. "I'm sorry." Just a second while I take a sip of my tea and answer your text. Okay. No matter how bad my mood was, the drive was undeniably beautiful. Seas of emerald grass washed over the landscape, frosted with big clumps of snow and perforated by jutting rock formations. In the distance, icy mountains glimmered under a sapphire sky. A blood-red ring would ignite the Rockies by sunset. The cold still clung to the earth out here, but thankfully the snow had diminished it a bit. Big patches of it caked the trees, occasionally sloughing off and battering the truck or the road as I drove past. The trees thickened to forests, mountains erupted from the earth, and then the shadow of Pale Peak fell over my path. The massive thing loomed over the highway, darkening it in broad daylight, and almost seemed to taunt me. My resolve wavered, and doubt plagued my mind. A cruel voice in my head whispered, "You'll die up here. There's no hope for Faye." Greg must have called ahead because the Ranger was parked in the driveway by the time I pulled up. He stepped out of his SUV as I fumbled with the shifter. "Can't believe the old coot's letting you use it," he said, thumping the side of Greg's truck. I finally jammed the thing into park and got out. The air bit my face, reminding me of just how unwelcome I was up here. "Mr. Blackwell?" William said, giving my hand a firm shake. "Ranger Pike," I replied. "Thought I'd have a look around the place again once y'all got here. Make sure everything's in order." We stepped up into the porch. As I sifted through Greg's keyring, my eyes kept darting to the forest edge. "Ain't nothing out there," William said, patting my back. It felt good to have someone there with me, especially someone bigger than me, but I knew that eventually I'd have to sleep. The Ranger would go home to his family somewhere far away, and I'd be left alone out here. "You guys never found the dream catcher?" I asked, stepping into the cabin. "Nope. Damn sure it weren't a thing out of place outside. In here is a different story." William casually rested his hand on the gun and swept his gaze over the living room and kitchen. "We cleaned it up real nice," he added. Everything looked in order, save one little thing I hadn't noticed until William flipped on the light switch. The standing lamp next to the television was missing its lampshade. The bulb glowed fiercely, casting harsh shadows across the room. "What's the deal?" I asked, pointing at the light. William paused for a moment and replied, "Been like that since y'all left." He poked around for a bit, making sure that no points of entry had been breached, and tried to avoid any conversation about the fact that someone had definitely been inside. He informed me that Taway was dealing with a family emergency and would drop by in the morning instead of tonight. My heart nearly died in my chest. I had expected to be alone at the cabin, but not before getting some kind of counsel from Taway. "You just make sure to call me at this number if anything goes wrong," William said, handing me a card. "That's my cell. It's on 24/7, just in case. With that, Ranger Pike dropped a heavy hand on my shoulder and turned to leave. Hey, you guys find a ring in here by any chance? I asked. I already knew the answer, but I really didn't want him to leave. William looked back at me from the doorway. Cold air rushed in all around his bulky form. I'd have pawned it if I did. We both hesitated. You know, he said, clutching the doorknob, you ain't gotta be up here. Plenty motels at the base. You really think I'm in danger? I asked, almost pleading for reassurance. Nah, he replied. Maybe it's just one of them things where if you stop believing, it'll just go away. But you call me and I'll come. Darkness ate away at the sky. I rushed around the place, dragging my bags in from the truck and ensuring that the windows were locked and curtains drawn. The old CD player helped with the loneliness, but I couldn't relax. The Dreamcatcher kept appearing in my mind. I had to know if it was still there. Against my better judgment, I bundled up and trekked across the open field behind the cabin. The last light of day rapidly withdrew from across the mountains in the distance, and in that moment I wished Faye were there to see it with me. We hadn't been this far apart in years, and the ache reminded me that I didn't want to know what life might be like without her. I had to find the ring, even if I had to pry it from the putrid fingers of this thing Angela called the Hollow One. The snow felt thin and crunchy beneath my shoes. Each footfall sent a message throughout my surrounding area that I was here, and alone. It took every drop of my courage to move into the abyssal gloom of the woods. I circled a few trees, trying to remember which one had the Dreamcatcher. Greg's flashlight rattled in my hand, its beam moving over branches and rocks and trunks. Something gently brushed against my neck. It felt like a cold finger. I yelped in surprise and whirled around, and there it was, a long feather, fluttering softly in the breeze, attached to a string that dangled from a huge circular object. Not string, I realized. Sinew. And blood. Ugly son of a bitch, I mumbled, rubbing my neck. White bones gleamed in the flashlight's glare. They looked slick, almost wet, as though someone had replaced the old ones with fresh pieces. Your voice is nice. Thank you very much. Welcome to chat. I'm really happy to have you here. The urge to tear it down surged through me, but I wanted to show it to Tue. As I gazed upon this strange thing, a chorus of wicked voices erupted from deeper in the woods. One was an older man and the other a boy. They shouted to each other, back and forth, but none of it made any sense. Why'd you put it up there? What the hell is that? We found him. Found him down in the hole, Daddy-o. Put us back. Put us back. God, please hear me. I broke into a full sprint through the meadow, blazing toward the cabin like a meteor. Otherworldly terror fueled me, and the image of psychotic cannibals jabbering with their tongues hanging out of their mouths swirled in my mind. I flew inside and slammed the door shut, holding back tears. There in the stillness, I listened to the screams of the wind and the hellish beings that chattered over it. The light vanished. Darkness conquered the landscape and imprisoned me in the cabin. Sip of water, answer text, and then I'll continue. I'm glad I could help you out. I'm happy it's relaxing you. Thank you so much for the follow. I'm really happy to have you here. Really appreciate it. Okay, chapter 22. I read this every single Wednesday, so... The relative safety of the cabin brought me no solace. I barricaded the door with furniture, set a gun on the counter, and blared the cheeriest music I could find in Lynn's CD collection, but the primal dread of death never lifted. I tried to reach out to Faye, but my phone's reception was so spotty that I couldn't get more than a single text message out. The wind howled for my blood all night. Every noise it produced caught my ear, and I imagined unspeakable creatures slinking and slithering around in the dark outside. And whenever the wind died down, the voices returned, sometimes in the distance and sometimes close by. To busy myself, I searched every inch of the place, room by room, for Faye's engagement ring, hoping that it simply had fallen behind the bed or under the couch. Deep down, I suspected that it was far away in the woods, clutched in the gnarled hands of some ghastly creature that desired Faye as strongly as I did. After an hour of hunting, I found nothing, and retreated to the bedroom with Greg's gun. The bed felt bigger and colder without Faye here, and instead of dozing off to the sounds of her breathing, I listened to them with morbid fascination to the yammering of the madman outside. "It's so deep, deep down," a child cried. "So deep you could crawl forever." As he spoke, his voice occasionally splintered, becoming deeper and raspier like a grown man impersonating a boy. He hacked and wept and choked. He begged for help, but I didn't fall for a single word of it. Somewhere farther out, another voice shrieked, "They're lying! They're lying! The ones out there!" I somehow managed to drift into a fitful sleep, but was awoken a little before midnight by a new sound. Someone tapped on the window in the living room. It was soft, like a neighbor who was reluctant to bother me. I stood there in the bedroom with the door open, holding my breath, trying to figure out if I'd imagined it. Then it happened again. So I crept down the short hall and peeked around the corner, just in time to see a figure walking past the window near the TV, heading toward the front door. With the curtains drawn, I only saw a lumbering shadow, but it was so huge it blocked out the moonlight and threw pitch blackness over the entire room. Then it knocked gently on the door. A man's voice called out softly, "Hello?" I remained still as death, listening to every noise he made. Eventually he knocked again and said, "Hello? I need to speak with you." The man spoke through clenched teeth. He sounded either very cold or full of rage, but his words were frighteningly restrained. I tried to sneak back to the bedroom where I had left the gun, but the old place betrayed me. As I moved, I nudged the bedroom door and it squealed like a dying pig. The man outside whispered, "I know you're in there." Just for a moment, in my lethargy, I considered the possibility that this was Taway, or maybe someone else who lived on the mountain. There was no way I'd opened the door, but I stupidly figured that responding was a good idea. "Who the fuck is it?" I said as forcefully as I could. I grabbed the gun and marched to the front door. Whoever was out there repeated my question, while accurately mimicking me. It almost sounded like an echo. Then he said, "May I come in, please?" It was my voice, filtered through gritted teeth. The words seemed shaky and uncertain, but it was an impressive mockery of the way I spoke. Icy terror swept over my body and every muscle in my back knotted up. I planted the barrel of the gun against the door. "You hear that?" I said, tapping it up against the wood. "That's a .357. I don't know guns, side note, so I don't know how to pronounce them correctly anyway. If you don't get out of here, I'll turn you to a fucking milkshake." We both stood there for a dreadfully long minute. The person outside began testing my voice, groaning and whispering and muttering. He spoke a few discernible phrases and a lot of gibberish, seemingly unconcerned that I was listening. "What's your name? What's your name?" "A Super Nintendo." "What did you dream?" His voice wavered, circling through other accents and cadences. The words seemed stitched together from different mouths, cobbled into phrases he strained to get out. At that point, I immediately stopped believing that there was a human being on the other side of the door. "Stop it," I shouted. "Whatever you want, I don't have it." It took all my strength not to open fire. I was terrified that shooting him would only piss him off. "You go up in the trees or down in the hole," he replied, nearly perfecting my voice. "That's where you go, or they'll find you. Either way, either way, either way." The wind picked up, rattling the windows. The man knocked again, gentle and polite. "You aren't alone in there. I'm not alone out here. What's your name?" "Leave now or I will shoot you," I screamed. I fumbled with the gun, uncertain of whether the bullet would travel through the door if I opened fire. "A little cabin for the weekend, for the weekend. Shh." he replied, making a slew of lip-smacking and chewing noises. I'd never felt so terrified in my 28 years of life, even after witnessing my own fiancé creeping around the house like a fleshy marionette. The experience of my own voice making those horrific sounds and phrases set every inch of my skin on fire. My body felt hot and cold and wet and sticky, all at the same time, like waking up with a bad fever. I smashed the butt of the gun into the door in an attempt to ward off the terrible visitor, and I screamed at the top of my lungs, "I will fucking kill you." The thing outside fell silent. I stood there clutching the revolver, waiting for a response. Finally, there was this time a bit harder than before, followed by, "I will fucking kill you." Before I could respond, he shouted, "I see her, I know where she is," and bashed the door with a powerful kick. It sounded like two hooves striking against it. The impact threw me backward and shook the entire cabin. He barreled across the porch on what sounded like 4 legs and bounded off into the woods, laughing in the voice of a child as he did. An eerie silence fell. The wind and wretched voices died away, leaving me with only the throb of my temples and the labor of my breathing. I remained in a state of extreme paranoia for the rest of the night. The delirium of terror and insomnia stole my balance and blurred my vision. I stumbled around like a drunk and cowered between the bed and the wall, fantasizing about putting a bullet in my head and ending this nightmare once and for all, but the thoughts of Faye anchored me to my sanity. The desire to protect her gave me strength still. The encounter haunted my thoughts, and I realized that this entity was intelligent and had a plan. When he spoke, he chose his words carefully, knowing that the right combination could weaken my resolve. He knew exactly what to say. If he couldn't coax me outside, he would whittle me down until I let him in. And then he would drag me off into the forest where the voices cry. Hydration check. We do idiotic things for love. It was a foolish decision to risk my life staying alone at the cabin, but I truly believe that if there was any way to stop this entity from harming us any further, I would find it here. Maybe he would lose interest in Faye if I could get the ring back. Maybe I could find a way to undo whatever he had done to attract his attention in the first place. As far as I knew, this Hollow One had first discovered Faye here in Pale Peak, and thus it made sense to me that the solution too lay in the mountain. At least that is what Tway seemed to believe, and at this point I had little choice but to trust him. Many possibilities ran through my faltering mind between midnight and sunrise, and considered the idea that the Faye who had returned home to California was not the same one who had come to Pale Peak. What if the nude woman on my car was the real Faye, and she'd been out in the forest all along? What if she had died out there weeks ago, and the woman sleepwalking around my house was some wicked simulacrum? Hydrate. Already loving your stream. Thank you so much. You hydrate as well. Don't forget to drink water or drink something that will hydrate you. I have some lemon tea here as well. Just before dawn, I went to the kitchen for a glass of water. As I drank, I peered out the window and saw a familiar dark figure at the edge of the woods. He remained there completely motionless, staring up at the trees with his back to the cabin. I checked on him every 20 minutes until daybreak, and only then, when the sunlight touched the tops of the trees, did he leave. I still couldn't get a look at his face. The sun became my guardian. It made me feel safe enough to risk sleeping, so I dropped onto the bed like a corpse into a grave. Sleep washed over me and dragged me down into the darkness beneath the dream world, where not even the creature outside could follow. A loud knock at the door roused me. I instinctively grabbed the gun, dreading that the entity had come for another visit. Cheerful bird songs and mumbling voices wafted through the cabin. I glanced at my phone. 10:49 a.m. At least I got a few hours. Lively chatter and the sounds of laughter eased my fears as I approached the door. The sight of Ranger Pike and 2 other men overjoyed me. I wasn't alone anymore. This book is awesome. It is really good. I read it last year and I adored it, so I wanted to share it. Mr. Blackwell? William said, tipping a cowboy hat. Liking to meet Sway Lopez and his son Nathan. The older of the 2 men approached me with a big smile on his face. His graying hair was pulled back in a short ponytail, and his brown eyes glinted with an energetic youthfulness that seemed out of place on such a weathered face. "Felix," he said, shaking my hand and squeezing my shoulder. "Pleasure, finally." Nathan followed suit. He was probably a year or 2 older than me, and unlike his father, he had green eyes. "You've come a long way," Taway said. "You've been through a lot from what I hear. It's about time we talk." I welcomed all 3 of them into the cabin, but the ranger declined and said he needed to do a few house calls and map road conditions. He handed me a satellite phone and told me he couldn't reach me on my cell. I told him I'd return his phone on my way down the mountain the day after tomorrow. We watched him back out of the driveway and head further up the winding road. "How's Angela look these days?" Taway asked, taking a seat on the couch. "Been nearly 10 years since she's been back to visit." I dragged a chair into the living room and offered the guys some water. Nathan made a counter offer of hot tea instead and busied himself in the kitchen while his father and I spoke. "She seems great," I replied, still unsure of the nature of their relationship. "Very nice lady." "She bore you with her academic spiels?" He laughed. "Some things you cannot learn from books." "I'm actually an academic myself," I admitted. Taway's expression changed. "My apologies," he said. "They come out here for their research trips all the time, organized by universities. We can tell they mean well, but they sometimes treat us like, lab rats," Nathan interjected, carrying mugs of tea into the other room. He sat down next to his father and studied me. "I was thinking of Jane Goodall living among the chimps," Taway said, cracking up. "Angela mentioned that natives are sometimes hesitant to share information with outsiders," I said, trying to remember her exact words. "It's true," Taway replied, "at least for my people. We aren't so cavalier in sharing our history. It's a very personal thing. You can't just tell the stories like a history teacher in a classroom. The setting matters. The audience matters. How you tell the story and where you tell it, why you tell it, it all matters. The wisdom of our fathers was spoken for generations, not written down and revised and published, not sold and archived. The Europeans thought we were backward for this. And the anthropologists who visit us, they call this oral tradition. I guess it's fitting." "So it's like a performance," I said, trying to demonstrate that I understood. "But not for entertainment," Taway bellowed. He immediately regretted the outburst and lowered his voice. "Not always. This is how we keep our mothers' and fathers' teachings alive in the minds of our children." "My father's crazy, by the way," Nathan added. Taway tapped his head. Too much snowboarding and Red Bull rots his brains. This time we all laughed. "Just let me know if I ask something that I shouldn't," I said. "There's so much I want to ask." Taway gave me a comforting smile and nodded. "I wish we had all the answers you're looking for," he said. "But all we know are some of the stories. My great-grandmother might have been able to help. My dad always said she had vast knowledge and could even see into the spirit world, if you buy that sort of thing." "Is that what we're dealing with?" I asked, daring to draw upon my extensive memories of the X-Files. "Some kind of demon or, like, skinwalker?" "Older than the skinwalkers," Nathan offered. "This creature is one of the first beings, is what he means," Taway pushed back. "Not many of our people believe in the skinwalkers. Those who come from the Navajo, we don't talk much about anything about them." I fidgeted in my chair. Despite the warmth of my drink, my body felt colder. "Angela called him a hollow man," I said, or something like that. "There's power in words and names, Felix," Nathan responded. "We don't speak the names of the dead for some time after they've passed, and we don't repeat curses that were uttered long ago." "Now who sounds crazy?" Taway said with a big grin on his face. Nathan rolled his eyes and dismissed his father's playfulness. "It's a bit like the Christians and the devil," Nathan continued. "They don't say his name often, and they don't use spirit boards to consult the dead. You don't want to call out to him." I won't repeat it, I promised. I probably can't even pronounce it. But they both laughed. Taway got up and to refill his tea. He returned with a glum expression. My people gave him the name of Atan Anatogwa. I know I'm not saying that correctly. That's the best that I can do. He said quietly. The term refers to water, and how it's formless until it fills a vessel. Angela wasn't wrong when she called him the Hollow One, because there's no direct translation, really. Maybe it's more accurate to call him the Imposter, because this being fills himself with the life force of his prey. The Imposter, I echoed. I imagined a grotesque monster deep in the woods outside, suddenly opening its eyes at the sound of its own name. Felix, Taway said, leaning toward me. A lot of people in my community would be reluctant to share much of our heritage with you, so I'm going to tell you just a little piece. Only the stuff that I think that pertains directly to you and your fiancé. Is that alright with you? I nodded, eager to hear anything that could possibly help Faye. And I must stress, he continued, we don't have any experience with this sort of thing. No one in our community does, really. Some of the tribal elders recall the stories, and a few actually believe the imposters are real. But Nathan and I don't go around purging evil spirits, you know. By God, this kid can't even purge a drain clog. This shit is spoopy. It is. 100%. Nathan scowled. Thanks, Dad. Sip of tea. Oh, I love lemon tea. Ooh, so good. Taway took a sip of his tea, then sat up straight as if to make a formal announcement. He searched the room with his eyes, careful at choosing his words. Nathan sat quietly and looked down at his hands. I wasn't sure if it was a display of respect or if he simply was concentrating, so I turned my gaze to the floor and fell silent as Taway cleared his throat. Colorado has been home to many groups, he began. The Ute, Cheyenne, Arapaho, Pueblo, and Anasazi. Again, I know I'm not pronouncing some of those correctly. I'm not familiar with some of those native groups, so I'm doing my best. So I apologize if I pronounce anything incorrectly. People have all called it home at one point or another. There are many more who came and left. War and famine and weather always shifted people around, but the big movements came when the gold rush spread here. Thousands and thousands of natives were displaced, or killed. Mining operations forced people out of their ancestral homelands. There's something you have to understand about land, Felix. How we think of it. The settlers thought of land as a possession. You claim it and put a fence around it. You sign a piece of paper and it belongs to you. You sign another piece of paper and now it belongs to someone else. Doesn't matter where it is. Land is all the same. You can even purchase land you've never seen before, never visited, 1,000 miles away, and now it belongs to you. This is not how many natives understood the earth when the settlers came. The land doesn't just belong to us, we belong to the land. We were given to it, just as much as it was given to us. Some even believe we are of it, that we came from it. Our history is embedded in the physical landscape, anchored there by stories that convey our ancestral knowledge. A native is reminded of specific lessons when he sees a particular landmark. The mouth of this river has an important story attached to it. That fallen tree has one too. A battle was won here, an elder died there. Peace was made between warring tribes with a ceremony here. And so, when a native group is forced out of its homeland, the people sometimes forget their stories. History itself is lost. What's worse, they leave behind the places where their dead are buried, their mothers and fathers. The dead are bound to that place and have returned to the land there. Because of this, natives who forced out their homelands no longer have connections to their ancestors and thus to the spirit world. Their medicines no longer work, their prayers are no longer heard. Eventually, the younger generations forget the names of sacred places, and as the names in history and wisdom are forgotten, the people's spiritual power diminishes. The culture collapses. How they perceive this change affects their whole way of life. Taway paused for my response, but I had no idea what to say. Nathan sensed my confusion and elaborated on his father's words. Think of Christianity and Judaism and Hinduism, he said. Those are universal religions. The Jews are scattered all across Europe and the Middle East, exiled from their homelands, and yet they remain Jews. Muslims and Hindus emigrate from the other side of the world to live here in the United States, and they could bring their religion with them. You could move to New York tomorrow and still keep your religion. Your God can still hear your prayers. He can still intervene in your life. It is not so with a native, Toei exclaimed. It is much more difficult to recover those things when his land is stolen. This is why the anthropologists come to us. They want to ask about our land-based religions. We're telling you this, Felix, because you cannot understand the supernatural presence on this mountain without understanding the mountain itself. I nodded, trying to digest his words as quickly as he spoke them. Toei took another long draw of his tea, probably trying to give me a moment to process everything. When the settlers arrived, he continued, they forced my people and a few other tribes out of the valleys, where all the food grew. Some of us came to the mountain and some went far away, never to return. When the settlers moved their mining operations further up the mountain, they battled with our old neighbors, the Pazi. Many died on both sides. The remaining Pazi allied with the Ainaho and the people from the mountains to the north, and together they slaughtered dozens of the miners. The settlers mounted a counterattack and murdered hundreds in retaliation. This went on, back and forth for a long time until the alliance collapsed and the natives turned against each other. Why did they do that? I asked. Toei nodded at his son. No one knows, Nathan said. Some believe the settlers bribed the Pazi. Colonists have always used bribery to turn natives against each other, made them fight in their wars. It is said that the Ainaho found out about these bribes and killed many of the Pazi, then dug holes and buried them with their feet sticking out of the ground. Legend says they wanted wolves to eat the meat on their legs, so that the Pazi could never make the journey back to their homeland, even in death. This is dark, I said, glancing at the pristine snow through the window. I imagined it soaked red with blood. Try getting those anthropologists to publish that, Toei boomed, laughing hysterically. They want you to think we sit around campfires singing about world peace and Mother Earth. We're human, aren't we? We make war and peace just like anybody else. Blood feuds aren't just a European thing. Try to keep in mind, Nathan added, that story is a brief moment in a long history in this mountain. Perhaps my father might have told you about the times of great peace instead, if he knew you wouldn't fall asleep. I nodded my acceptance of the rebuttal. Well, what's this got to do with the imposter? I asked, pointing to the window. Did the Pazi summon him for revenge or something? Nathan laughed, but Toei did not. There are fewer believers among us these days, Toei replied. But once, many of our people thought the imposters snuck into our world from time to time, looking for things they coveted. We believe that they are sometimes drawn to the sites of terrible suffering, like here in Pale Peak. Shortly after the Pazi slaughter, the Ainaho suffered a tragedy of their own. Every child in one of their villages disappeared. Some Ainaho believed that the slaughtered Pazi rose up from their graves and stole the children away. But my people told a different story. They believed the imposter had come to the mountain and called out to the children in the night. He killed a few of them and stole their skin and hair and hung them up in trees for the villagers to find. Then, posing as a child, he led the rest deep into the mines. They were never seen again, but their voices still echo in the mountain. My breath froze in my chest. The laughter and crying of little kids ran through my imagination, sounds that were all too familiar to me in this cabin. Did he lure them with a song, by any chance? I asked. Did he stand at the edge of the woods? You've actually seen this being? Nathan asked. He looked at his father with grave concern. I think I've met him, I said, and explained at length the encounters I'd had with the strange man. Toei studied me carefully, and Nathan looked at me with disbelief. I've heard it said that the imposter cannot pass for a man, Toei replied, no matter how hard he tries. That is why he only appears at night, and why he always faces away from his victim, even when he is watching. You're the first person we've ever met to describe such things, Nathan said. Tourists that visit the mountain sometimes report strange noises at night, or someone peeping into their windows, but no one has ever told us something like this. One family did, Tuwei corrected. A long time ago, and they lived in this very cabin. Do you believe me then? I asked point blank. Both men hesitated. We need time to think about all this, Tuwei said with a sigh. This is very serious. I have no idea how the leaders of my community will react, but I need to speak with them about it. I believe you, Nathan offered. He smiled and dropped a fist into his palm in a gesture of camaraderie. I'm going to attempt one final chapter here. Yes, we'll do one more chapter for today. After a conversation, Tuwei asked me to lead them to the dream catcher I described to William. When they had first investigated the cabin, they couldn't find it, but it took me less than a minute to locate it. We romped around the shallow snow and made our way to the trees. Tuwei seemed reasonably certain that he had checked this location, but blamed the oversight of his old age, rather than some strange magic. I was unsettled by the idea that the object had been hidden during their last visit. I don't think this is really a dream catcher, he said, examining it closely. He manipulated it with a stick, rather than touching it with his hands. Why's that? I asked. Well, I don't know for sure. My people don't make these. In fact, very few native tribes do. They've sort of come to represent all Indians, but they're not some universal thing we all use. The reason I think it's something else is because dream catchers were made for protection and balance. This one was made using symbols of death. Tuwei pointed at the jagged bones and bloodied feathers. And the woven pattern here is a disaster. It could be a sloppy craftsmanship, but it could also be intentional, to represent chaos. Looks like it was done by someone with claws instead of hands, Nathan said, half joking. Or a drunk-ass redneck, Tuwei mused, but honestly, it could be just some other kind of totem, who knows. I shrugged at the turn. It's like a crafted object with a link to the spirit world, Tuwei explained, or at least some kind of spiritual meaning. Ever worn a crucifix? Sure, I replied. Long time ago. Faye's got one. There you go, Tuwei said, taking one last look at the strange object. I recommend you don't touch this thing, Felix. Someone put this here on purpose, and we have no idea what it means to them. I need you to be honest with me, I said, looking off to the woods, then back at Tuwei. You wouldn't have told me all this stuff if you didn't believe the imposter might be real. I need to know if you think Faye and I are in danger. Something evil has been visiting us every night, and so far we still don't know what he wants. Not evil, Tuwei replied. Not good either. At least not in our stories. How could he not be evil? I argued, baffled by his response. You said it yourself, he kills people, children. Is the wolf not evil in the eyes of the deer? He asks. Or the hawk in the ears of the rabbit? We don't believe in good and evil spirits, at least not like the big religions do. In our tradition, there is no heaven or hell, no duality. It's more complicated. So we're just dinner, I said, perhaps a bit too harsh. Tuwei didn't acknowledge the statement. Instead, he grabbed my shoulder with a gentle hand. How long will you be here? He asked me. I shrugged. One more night, maybe 2 tops. I need to find Faye's ring, then I'm gone. I do think you're in danger, Tuwei replied. Both of you. I'd tell you to come with us, but it doesn't seem to matter where you go. I nodded. If the creature could follow us back to California, he certainly could track me a few miles away to Tuwei's community. Nathan and I need to ask for help, he continued, because there's little we can do on our own. But we will come back tomorrow, I promise. I was surprised to learn that the ranger wasn't going to pick Tuwei and Nathan up. They apparently hiked to the cabin and met him there, and now plan to hike back down the mountain. Nathan dismissed my concerns about the dropping temperature, insisting that they walk this road almost every day. Keeps his veins clear, he said about his father. They zipped up their coats and bade me farewell. As I saw them off, Tuwei whirled around and tossed me a small neck pouch he produced from beneath his shirt. My dad made it, he said, smiling. Always makes me feel safer. I'll pick it up when I get back. What is it? I asked. Just a bit of sage. I change it out every so often. Might not ward off the devil, but it'll protect you from the smell of your bad cooking. You really crack yourself up, huh? I shot back. Tuwei's ill-concealed snickers broke into open laughter. I waved goodbye to my new friends and retreated into the cabin. The sun edged closer to the distant mountains, and a bitter wind whipped across the field. Thick clouds approached from the east and collected above my tiny prison, promising a new blanket of snow in the morning. I had flown to Colorado and spent half a day with the only person I believed could help my family, and yet I had little to show for it. I didn't feel any closer to ridding us of the malevolent presence that hungered for Faye. The dews of sleep deprivation caught up with me just after sundown. Too exhausted to stay up any longer, I crawled into bed and vanished into a near coma. I woke before midnight to the nagging of a full bladder, then dragged myself to the bathroom. The entire cabin was freezing. I must have forgotten to set the thermostat. Instead of waiting for the heater to slowly warm the place up, I drew a boiling hot bath and slid into it like a sedated eel. As I lay there, floating at the precipice of sleep, Faye's voice drifted into my mind, her laughter, her jabs, her flirtatious coos. I hoped Tyler and Colin were keeping her happy and distracted. I missed her. My old eyes rolled around in my head, dragging my blurry gaze across the room. They landed on the steamy window just above the tub. There was something on it, something written. I stood up, splashing water all over the floor. There was another 5 written backwards in the glass from inside. The writing didn't look fresh. It seemed faded and poorly defined compared to the reference 5 I drew beside it with my own finger. Faye must have done this when we visited. Then it hit me. She was signaling the imposter long before we returned to California. How long had she been communicating with him? I leapt out of the tub and wrapped a towel around myself, ignoring the sting of my freezing feet in the pools of water they tracked everywhere. I marched around, fogging every window in the cabin with a few breaths, searching for more hidden messages. Each breath revealed the number 5, always written backwards so the person outside could read it. They varied in size, and the bedroom window had 10 or 11 of them scribbled all over it. As I examined this window, there came a knock at the front door. My breath caught in my throat. I poked my head out into the hall, gazing down the long darkness of it. "Hello?" my voice called out. It came not from my own mouth, from outside. "Hello? Are you there?" I held still, considering whether it was smarter to pretend I wasn't home or to argue with the dreadful visitor as I had the night before. Would he come inside if he thought I wasn't here? Then I remembered the missing lampshade, and the ranger's observation that someone had searched the cabin and rifled through our clothes. The thought of this creature climbing in through a window raised every hair on my neck. Kind of shitting myself here. I know, it's freaky, isn't it? That's why I love it, though. "This is dark," he mumbled. "Dark, dark. Academic? Academic? Please go away," I prayed. In that moment, I had never so dearly missed Faye. Her image swirled in my mind. My brain conjured her because it believed I was about to die. I was going to die 1,000 miles away from the only person who loved me. The creature outside suddenly drew fast, raspy breaths. It was as if the very thought of her enervated him. Oh my gosh. Is that a fucking dream catcher?" he said. He tapped something against the door, maybe a claw. Then walked slowly across the porch. The tapping became a scraping sound, and it grew louder as the creature made his way around the house toward the bedroom, toward me. I flicked off the light and darted over to the window, yanking the curtain shut just before a large form moved behind it. The figure tapped in the glass and issued a deep gurgling sound from his throat. The guttural noises took shape and became my voice once again, and out came sentences he must have overheard me saying weeks ago. He had been here all along. He was listening to us the entire time, crouching beneath the windows and memorizing how we spoke. I gotta sleep in an hour and 10 minutes and be up early enough to get to the gym before school. I'm having nightmares and shit. Loving the story though. I know it though. I know it. The first time I read this, I'm 20 for reference, almost 21, and I don't get scared very easily. So this was the first horror book in a long time I read that actually scared the crap out of me. Like, I was looking out my windows and crap. Like, oh my gosh, I was so scared. It still gives me chills. "What is your name?" he asked. My stomach leapt into my throat. I couldn't risk letting him think I wasn't around. "My name is David," I muttered. The imposter hesitated, as if surprised to hear me respond at all. "What is your name?" he asked again, making wet smacking noises. I imagined a gruesome being sliding his tongue all over his lips and jagged teeth. "Felix. Felix." "My name is David," I said, raising my voice to nearly a yell. He hesitated once more, then tapped the glass again. "Felix," he said. "Faye. Faye." Hearing her name spoken by the very thing that wanted to harm her filled me with rage. The fire inside me burned away my fear. It scorched my reason. It ignited me with fantasies of leaping through the window and beating the son of a bitch to death with my bare hands. It became a death wish that I could barely control. "Monkey toes," he haunted. A strange thought occurred to me, momentarily decoupling my mind from the hatred that plagued it. If this thing was learning to communicate by parroting me, perhaps I could confuse it. I began to recite a poem I'd memorized for German class in high school. Die Frauen von Ravenna Dragon? The creature paused to consider the noises I made. He had probably never heard them before. I listened as he tried to mouth the syllables. He failed to reproduce much of what he heard. "May I come in?" he said, speaking through gnashing teeth. He was frustrated. "Kai Hermann?" I continued, trying to recall other German phrases. "Ich komme aus Kalifornien." And I'm not pronouncing it because I can't say it, but he's saying a bunch of other things in German that I don't know what he's saying. I'm just putting that there. The creature rolled his nails across the glass. I couldn't understand why he didn't punch through it and drag me off into the woods. I still couldn't understand what he wanted or why he didn't just kill me. The figure lurched over to the back door a few feet away from where I stood. The knob rattled. I carried on with my silly recitations and became more and more upset. He growled and rasped and wheezed and tapped on the door until finally he let loose an ear-splitting howl and stomped away from the cabin. I threw the curtain open and caught sight of the dark shape moving toward the woods. It looked like a man, except all the limbs were slightly elongated. I was about to square up to the monster. He really is. He's not having it anymore. No two of them were the same length, so his movements were eerily off balance. He howled one last time, provoking 1,000 mournful voices to cry out in horror, and then silence washed over the snowy landscape. On the window before me was a 5, smudged across the glass was mud. The imposter had written it backwards so I could read it from inside. That night I lay in bed with the gun, reflecting upon the encounter. I did not feel safe. I did not feel free of the monster that haunted my life, but for the first time in weeks, I felt something other than hopelessness in the wake of the monster's presence. After pondering everything that had transpired over the past few weeks, I concluded that the imposter was stuck. He desperately wanted something from Faye, something only she knew, perhaps something secret. He tried to ask her directly, and she refused. He tried to trick her into following him into the woods, and failed. I now believe that the imposter was rehearsing my voice with the intention of convincing Faye that he was me. Perhaps this wouldn't work on a normal person, but Faye is highly suggestible when she's unconscious. The creature whispered to her at night, speaking to her through dreams. He wanted entry not only to our home, but to Faye's soul. And yet, he seemed to need her permission. That's the end of that chapter. We are 60% of the way through now. So we are stopping here. Stop balance, just sweep his legs and run like fuck. Honestly, his claws. I don't know. I don't think he has claws. I think he's longer nails because he's very like human-like. So I'm not sure if it's claws, but I'm sure those nails be sharp. At least bro asked for consent. Yes, he's considerate that way. Anyway, I am gonna change my music over to this. And go back over to my regular just chatting. So yeah, we're gonna end here. Even though it's creepy as fuck. It really is. I'm just gonna go through all my outro stuff, but thank you guys so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed. Couple things, as always, link to my Discord if you want updates on Twitter posts. I post there every day to remind when I'm going live, when I'm streaming. You'll get stream reminders in there and just be in a group with people who are part of the community. We're slowly growing. Yeah. Tomorrow I'll be streaming at 9 p.m. Eastern Standard with Counterside, so I hope to see you guys then. Should be good. I think that's about it. So we'll see if there's any friends we can raid today. While I'm doing that, those of you watching on YouTube, if you enjoyed, please consider subscribing. It takes 2 seconds and it's completely free, so you can always unsubscribe later. I've joined. When you get to affiliate, I'm a sub to you. Thank you so much. We're very close to affiliate. I just need like literally like 0.20 more viewers. So, Rose is live. Rose is playing Minecraft. Oh my gosh. I don't know if Rose is on my server or someone else's, but we're gonna raid Rose today. I love Rose so much. Alright, thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll see you guys tomorrow. Bye guys.